Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Stefan, and today I'm chatting with Anders Lillevik, founder and CEO at FocalPoint, an Atlanta-based startup revolutionizing procurement for enterprise companies. After 25 years in procurement industry, Anders decided to leave his job in 2020 to start this venture on his own pain points. Since then, he was able to win over a lot of interesting clients and build a great MVP. Join us as we discuss his story, challenges of building the product, as well as his plans for the future. As always, if you find the story insightful, please consider subscribing and sharing it with your peers. Without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so perhaps you could introduce yourself and mention who you are and what do you do? Some sort of like an elevator pitch.
Yeah, so my name is Anders Lillevik. I'm a CEO of FocalPoint. I founded the company 3 years ago, give or take, and we are a procurement tech startup.
Cool. And where are you connecting from?
Connected from Atlanta, Georgia. So yeah, just outside of Buckhead right now. So it's about, 93 degrees and hot as usual.
Oh yeah. I'm in Florida, so it's even worse in here, and we're getting a hurricane soon. So we're about to have some fun, I'm sure. So perhaps you could start with sort of describe it a bit about how did you start in your career? What did you do before founding the company? What was your background?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, FocalPoint is a procurement solution startup. And before starting FocalPoint, I spent 25 years as a procurement practitioner. So I was the head of procurement or chief procurement officer for some very large global and complex organizations like companies you may know about: Fannie Mae, Webster Bank, Citizens Bank, QB Insurance. So essentially, the idea was that taking all the experience that I had in procurement and applied that to the business, which really is kind of unique, right? So as I was doing tech starts, we're going to get into that, there were a lot of good founders, but they didn't necessarily have the background and the discipline in which they were building a product for, which is interesting to me. There were a bunch of answers looking for a question to answer, which is kind of funny.
It is, and I keep seeing this trend that a lot of really successful startups, especially in early stages, the tendency is that the founder has spent at least a couple of years in the industry that they're trying to build a product in, so they really know people. They know who to talk to, and so they kind of know the problem even before they start researching anything. So they're really not starting blind. But before we even get into the details of what you do at the company, perhaps you could describe very quickly what is procurement, because I'm sure that there will be a lot of people listening to this who are not sure about the nuances of this profession.
Yeah, so procurement is really the art of acquiring goods and services to run a company, right? So at the end of the day, like, you need people, to run a company, capital, and then third parties, right? So at the end of the day, as we are building our company, we are dependent on Amazon Web Services and other hosting providers to run our business. We're dependent on third-party software solutions and security solutions to run our business, and as are all other companies in the world. So if you think about an insurance company, for instance, they buy a lot of consulting services, items processing, sometimes they outsource underwriting or claims handling or even adjustment of a claim, right? So there's lots of parts and pieces that to the customer seems like they are indeed the insurance company you're dealing with, but in real terms it probably is not, for a lot of cases where somebody has the business card of the insurance company you're dealing with, but they are actually a third party. So the joke I like to say is like Jake from State Farm is probably not actually Jake from State Farm. And please don't sue me if that is the case, but the whole idea is really like all companies these days are using third parties to get the work done, right? And procurement, it kind of looks at everything from acquiring those goods and services to then managing the providers. And that's becoming more and more complicated, right? Because now you have to make sure that the companies you do business with are financially stable, that they have ethical business practices, that they don't hire slave labor, and that's a real thing. Make sure that they don't pollute, and in all these other things that are secondary to price and delivering the service. You want to make sure that these are companies that you want to associate with, right? And then you have to get into managing the infrastructure to support those companies, meaning are they collecting data? Are they part of a critical business process that you offer to your customers? And then, secondarily, are you sort of managing that provider appropriately, paying them appropriately, so that at the end of the day, you maximize the value of your dollars spent. And, for example, a few companies I worked for have spent in the tens of billions of dollars on goods and services per year. And if you think about spending tens of billions of dollars on something on a recurring basis, it is very important that you maximize that investment rather than looking at it as a transaction.
Wow. I think a lot of people don't realize, myself included, by the way, that we're used to sort of, when you start a small business, or really if you're just a consumer yourself, your processes to use a certain service, a certain vendor, is very simple, because those smaller companies, they just know that they would have to be using or providing services to people, to singular entities, right, or very small companies. But as we grow, this process is exponentially more complicated, and there is the whole industry and a whole bunch of specialists like yourself, I'm assuming, who need to manage the whole process. But that being said, so you've spent 25 years in this industry, and what made you... So, by the way, if you don't mind me asking, what is your age at the moment? How old are you?
I'm 48 years old.
Wow. So you've spent 25 years, and you were... How long have you been running the startup? For a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, almost 3, yeah.
Okay, so 45, 46. And what made you... First of all, how did you identify this problem, and what made you think that you should really start your own venture at such an age? Obviously, this is the time when people tend to become more conservative, and you did the opposite, which is something to look up to.
Well, maybe not. We'll find out in a few years, right? But at the end of the day, like, the problem that I identified was having lived with the procurement technology that exists today, or in the legacy world, where the transaction processing stuff is done really, really well. So you can store contracts, you can cut purchase orders, you can pay invoices, you can manage, relatively easily transactional stuff.
Yeah.
But if you think about all the other stuff I mentioned at the beginning, so as you are, let's say we're outsourcing human resources or some other function, right? You need to, number one, figure out who are the players in the, out there that can meet your requirements. What are your requirements? Who are the stakeholders you need to involve internally? How are you going to validate the questions? How are you going to validate the answers? And how are you going to manage that process from beginning to end, including diverse suppliers, including ESG, including information security and risk, including IT requirements, including legal requirements? All of that stuff today is largely done manually, poorly, and in spreadsheets. So while the transaction processing is certainly automated, the strategic stuff is not. And there are point solutions that deal with most of these smaller issues. But as a procurement practitioner, it requires you to log into a whole slew of different systems to manage those little parts and pieces. But also as an executive managing, in some cases, hundreds of procurement people, having visibility about what they are all working on, where in the process that thing sits, and who isn't participating, basically becomes out of sight for executives, right? So at some points in time, for instance, the CFO calls you and say, hey, I'm meeting with the partner of my favorite consulting firm next Tuesday. Mm-hmm. What's going on with this consulting firm right now? That's like a fiery hoops type exercise where, yes, you can know what the contracts are, you can know what the payments are, because that stuff is there. But then you have to reach out to all your deal makers to say, hey, are we doing anything with this provider right now? Are they in line for bids? Are they in line for contract renewals? And as you can imagine, if you have a global team, that can be kind of hairy, right, to get your arms around that stuff.
Certainly.
So there were lots of these things from a management compliance, process compliance perspective that I struggled with as a chief procurement officer. And that was really the impetus of the solution. Like, there has to be a better way of doing this. And I set off to build it, right? And why I started it at such an mature age, I guess. I've been exposed to a lot of startups in the past, and to me, it didn't always seem like it was that difficult from a knowledge perspective to do it. You kind of had the chutzpah to do it, and some knowledge in the industry. And I figured, like, I can do that, right? And really, it came, and I'm going to give a shout out to the first co-founder of the company, which is really my wife. And she is much younger than I am, and she also has a good job. And so for me, the whole idea is I could give up my really well-paying, job because she could carry the load in terms of managing the day-to-day expenses and so on. I think, and having that spouse or that partner with you along the way is crucially important, right? Because not only do they have to, have the capabilities of supporting you, but they also have to be willing to support you. And,
Sure.
and those, you have to have both, right? At least in my circumstance.
They also have to understand you and understand to the point where they're not going to be that last small cut that tells you not to do something when something goes wrong, which it certainly will eventually.
Sure, absolutely. So for me, like, we had been married for maybe 4 months when I said, hey, I got this idea. What do you think? And it was just before the pandemic also. And it was super interesting. And she was like, you know what, go for it. If you don't do it now, you never will. And I think, it's a great idea. And that's kind of how, number one, the challenges were discovered. I sort of thought a lot about it. And then ultimately, getting my partner on board with it. And that was, kind of the start of it all.
But so apart from obviously your wife, you're a single founder in the company, so you don't have any other partners outside of your family, right?
At the beginning, no.
I see. Okay. And so so if we were to put this into the calendar, so when was the time when you started thinking about this concept? I mean, I understand that you were probably imagining ideas for a while, but what was the first influx point where you thought that, okay, this might be something real? And what was the time between then and when you decided to take the leap of faith and really sort of say bye to your existing employer and start this deeper?
Well, I mean, the interesting part here is I was severed from one of my jobs. Basically, I received a fairly decent severance package. I had an offer, like, move to another country and run operations there, or take a severance package. I was like, you know what? I'm too old. I don't want to move. I just got married. I don't want to do this. So I took the severance package, and that's, I spent some time, finding myself and thinking about things and percolating. So this was probably back in January of 2020. And what I started off with is I started off talking to other entrepreneurs, people who have been there and done that. And they talked about building an MVP, building a wireframe, or, figuring out what the thing will look like and what it's going to do. And I did, a couple of things. Like I created a PowerPoint deck with sort of like what an MVP could be, what a medium-sized product would be, and then what long-term would be. And then I started creating a wireframe, a clickable wireframe to show prospects, investors, other people in the business, like, okay, what if I did this? What would it look like? And the fascinating part for me was I got a lot of interest from other people in procurement. Like, I've been in this business for a very long time, so I know a lot of people, and people are very willing to help out. So by walking this PowerPoint deck around and this wireframe around, I was actually able to get 2 customers pre-product development.
Wow.
So I had 2 enterprise customers who I won't name by name, but you've known them. A lot of you guys have used them in the past, I guarantee you. But they said, look, yeah, we have this problem too. We have large global organizations, and if you build it, we will try it, and if we like it, we will buy it. And I had lots of people saying that, but I had 2 companies willing to put that in writing, which was the most interesting part for me. So I kind of thought about idea market fit, like, yeah, it's kind of there, right? And that happened in March of 2020, where I actually had to go out and create my incorporation because, they're not going to write a contract with me.
Of course.
They're large companies. They don't business with individuals to sell product, right? So I had to incorporate and go through all that nonsense, and that happened on March 18th.
Wow. So essentially around 2 to 3 months between the point where you decided to start and the point where you actually got their first commitment, which is what, in fact, I've listened to this book called The Mom Test recently, which speaks about the fact how you're supposed to conduct these interviews with possible potential clients and how you're supposed to upgrade that relationship to the next step, which is get a commitment, either an introduction or somebody's going to pay you or letter of intent, something like that. And it's just, to be honest, unrealistically amazing. It sounds that way. that you were able to get it so quickly. But obviously I understand why, because you had this large experience in the industry. But so to put some numbers into perspective, so you've had these two companies who were willing to try, but how many did you have to talk to beforehand before these two were found?
Honestly, I didn't keep track, right? So now that I have Salesforce and Salesloft,
Right,
I
yeah.
track actions. Like I can tell you precisely who we talked to in order to get a
Okay.
meeting. But back then, I started with my network of maybe 50 people, and
Oh,
then
okay.
you kind of start like, do you know anyone else who might be interested, who's more willing to deal with startups? Like, and I must have talked to at least 100 companies, people that in the leadership of procurement before, I got the first two, and then I stopped. I'm like, all right,
I'm
it was
good.
literally sitting right here in my basement, and all right, two is enough, and these are both enterprises with global scale, so like that's probably enough, right?
And to be clear, these are not $50 a month tickets, right? These are very significant commitments. So if you were to get this kind of a client, that's a very, very large chunk of cash that you'd receive if you were to get to sell the software to them, right?
Yeah, initially, obviously, as you're trying to be in logo acquisition mode, we charge it in the tens of thousands of dollars per year, not hundreds of thousands as we do now. But it was the whole idea of number one, de-risking it for them, both from a process and from a commitment perspective, right? So I said, look, try the pilot. If you don't like it, or if I
No
can't
problem.
impress you,
Yeah.
you're not on the hook for it, right? But of course, they're not going to expose a solution to their, in some cases, 50 or 100 employees unless they think there's something there. And number two, if they really like it, and then I say, well, it's $1 million, they're going to say, well, that's crazy, right? So they needed to put a price on it up front that they will be able to sort of consume. So we were very conservative as we started down this journey. But yeah, it's not at $50 a month.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned that right now you know clearly what the numbers are in terms of conversion. I was just curious to hear again. Obviously, I know this is a lot of this stuff is still secretive, but like, what is the magnitude of companies you have to speak with at the moment in order to convert somebody to even try the product?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? So we have a BDR team at the moment. We have 3 BDRs, 2 onshore and 1 offshore. And we do about, I'm gonna say a few hundred touch points every month. About 30 agree to an initial meeting, and then a subset of them convert into the funnel, and a subset of them convert into sort of qualification and so on, right? So, selling to enterprises and conservative companies, it takes a long time, right? So our sales cycle is somewhere between 6 to 9 to 12 months. So,
But at the same time, if they convert, it's a very long-term commitment. So it's really worth it, I think, in the long run.
correct. So the whole idea, these contracts are normally 3 years. We have some that do 5 years, and they prepay annually in advance. So from a balance sheet perspective, it's super helpful, right? Because let's assume you sign a $250,000 annual contract. You get that $250,000 right up front, right? Plus whatever implementation costs. So it helps the balance sheet, but also it helps the initial investment of integration, setting it up, and configuration is significant. So with these long-term agreements, you make sure you recover those costs on the long end of the scale, right?
By the way, that being said, are you guys trying to deploy this on premises of the organizations you serve, or is it more like a cloud solution that is universal for all of them and you just have different tenants?
So we basically it's a multi-tenant SaaS solutions. We have a single instance. Single instance running in multiple data centers, yada yada, right?
Gotcha.
Like today, everything's distributed, but yeah, we have one product, one instance that will serve all of our customers.
This is awesome. And that the reason I've asked this is because I'm assuming that these large clients, they usually are very careful about data storage and really who gets access to what. So I was curious if this is like a big pain point for you in terms of how do you deploy the solutions to them?
Well, it isn't, right? So the way that we've architected the solution, everything's encrypted 5 ways from Tuesday. We have a SOC 2 certification. We're working on our ISO certification as well. So coming from big business and coming from procurement, where I kind of know the proctological examination that you're going to undertake in order to get into these companies, we kind of set ourselves up that way. Even though we are relatively small, we have big company infrastructure that supports security. Secondarily, like we can do a lot of configuration, and we also have a separate database for each of our customers. There's no shared databases. So each database has their own instance that is done. It's the same database essentially, right, from a topology perspective, but they work separately. So there's a lot of physical and logical security safety in the solution. We get pen tested on a regular basis. Like we have a lot of assurances that we're doing the right thing, as we do, right? So we have to. Like we're selling to large insurance companies, large banks, large healthcare companies, and large pharma companies, right? So there's a lot of due diligence that is required to get onboarded, right? They take security very seriously, as they should.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the point where you started building that MVP, so you got these two commitments on board, but I'm assuming that each of them had, and I'm assuming most of the corporations, they have some nuances that you would have to adapt to each of them separately. How did you determine what is that scope that you need to implement as a core that would be invariant of all of the clients? Because I'm assuming that, again, you have to juggle a lot of different balls with different companies and tailor a lot of stuff to them, so which tends to be expensive.
Sure, I can yes, of course, that is indeed the case. But the thing that we ran into is I sold them on my vision of how things should be run.
Oh, okay, that helps.
And they bought into that. So as we were doing designs and as we were doing process mapping, they were like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, right? That really helped us. But these aren't Fortune 100 companies that we're running into now. And really, from a building of the prototype perspective, right, I kind of went off the clickable wireframe and hired a company to basically do a staff augmentation deal where I got a turnkey product team where I had a front end designer, I had a front end developer, a back end developer, and a PM. And we set up sprints and we managed that from beginning to end. Now, these guys were located in Eastern Europe, actually Ukraine, and it cost me a whole whopping $8,000 a month, funded out of my checking account. And so I sat here every day. I met with them for like 3-4 hours every morning, talking about functionality sprints, looking at Figma screens, looking at front end development, and it was really cool to see things come together.
Cool. And how much time did it take for you to build that MVP?
So I started doing my own testing of the solution probably in October, right?
Wow, so half a year, more than half a year.
Yeah. Because we're dealing with large data sets, we're dealing with large customers, we're dealing with a lot of complexity. So again, I probably didn't do what I was supposed to do, just build something in a few months and just get it out. We took about 6 months.
Not in your case, though. If you were doing this for like B2B small companies, it kind of makes sense. But if you're dealing with such big corporations, you really only have like one shot. So correct. I think it kind of makes sense the way you approached it. So, so you've built, so now it's October, November. So when did you actually launch it to your first customer? What was it like?
So we went through about 2 months of back and forth where I said, no, this doesn't look good. Like we need to do this better. We need to do that better. So it took 2 more months before we sort of said, all right, now we can expose it to our clients. And really at that point, I've been talking to my clients quite a bit. So we had set up 2 separate instances for them. We had loaded a lot of the users. We have loaded a lot of their processes already. So we had sort of like, we've done a lot of pre-configuration and pre-testing ahead of time. We kind of turned it over to our customers and say, hey, we think we're ready, but you need to tell us. They tested for about 3 weeks. And then both of the customers launched into production in December.
Wow.
And, both of them converted in Q1 21. So one converted in January 7th, actually, day after the insurrection, so to speak. And then the other one in March. And one signed a year-to-year agreement and one signed a 3-year agreement. And we were off to the races.
It is hard to believe that it was such a smooth launch. I mean, obviously, kudos to you for everything, but you never see startups so smoothly launch. Essentially, it's been a year since you've left your existing employer, a year of leap of faith, and you got yourself 2 clients and a working product that was, I'm assuming, was it sufficient to launch for other companies, or did you have to do a lot of work additionally on top of that?
Well, the funny thing is it takes a long time to find the next customer, right? Because at this point,
Sure.
you don't have a development partner. You're actually selling an arm's length transaction, right? So we continued on development. So I mean, it's funny. I'm sitting in my, literally sitting here still, and it's just me. Like I'm the only person in the company. Everyone else is a contractor. And I got 2 enterprise customers doing global work, right? So I'm literally tech support. I'm literally product guy. I'm literally marketing guy. And I'm sitting here mining Apollo contacts and using Apollo to do my outreach and cadences and so on. And I get tons of meetings, right? And I send out emails like, kind of tongue in cheek, like, hey, Excel is not a management tool. Like that one was actually very popular. I got good open rates for that. And I ended up continuing to develop the product. I'd raised some money. So I raised, about $700,000 based on that initial work. So some friends and family, some tech stars, and some from a VC, pre-seed VC. And so brought in the CTO, continued to develop the product, brought in my own dev shop. And in January, February, I started talking to a very, very large Las Vegas-based entertainment company. They have if you've been to Las Vegas, I guarantee you have stayed at one of their hotels, right? And I started talking to them, and they were like, this is awesome. We have 80 people in procurement. We need to centralize and normalize. This is great. And it took us 14 months, but in December of 21, I closed the next customer. And this was huge for us because this was, a 6-figure ACV.
But essentially, between your launch in January 7th of 2021, it took you almost a year to get your 3rd customer.
Correct.
And so to abstract, so you've mentioned, it sounds like you've been using cold email as your primary sales tactic at the time, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, cold email. Yeah.
Really? And so this is actually very interesting because I've been trying to use cold email for the product I'm building as well. So I can ask you a clear question there. So what were your conversion? So it sounds like you've tried a couple of different top tactics to attract people to open those emails, but what were your numbers? So you've sent it to, overall, hypothetically, how many people did you send your emails to? And what were your open rates? What were your reply rates, things like that?
I mean, I sent thousands of emails, right? Because I went into Apollo and I searched for heads of procurement, chief procurement officer, head of
Gotcha.
Executives. I scraped their information and from Apollo, and then I bounced it up against zero bounds to make sure that the emails wouldn't come back and block me, right? And then, I put sequences in place, and I ran, basically 4-step sequences that would bomb out if I didn't get a response. But my open rates were in the 20%, which is not terrible, but not great. And I had a 2 or 3% response rate, right? But again, it's coming from, hey, I used to be in your job. I had this problem. I bet you do too. Would love to talk to you about it, right? I'm building this really cool thing, and I'm looking for early adopters, right? And again, selling to enterprises and early adopters, that's not usually the same thing, but at least I got a lot of meetings. I got a lot of interest. And it was a lot of cool discussions, right? Because now I'm on the other side of the fence, right? I used to be the buyer, now I'm the seller, which was a surreal experience, but a lot of fun at the same time.
You know what I really like about what you're saying is that everything you did is realistic. So a lot of times you hear these stories where startups are really selling to enterprises. And in fact, I had a couple of these conversations on the podcast that a couple of weeks ago. And a lot of times these enterprise sales, they sound very dreamlike. It's really hard to approach it. You need to know people inside and so on and so forth. In your situation, you've used already existing tools that are available to everybody. You did do it was a very deep dive for you, of course, I understand that, but you still got your response. It's still very possible, if you have this idea or a product, to get your customer through these scalable, reasonably priced tools that are affordable for any founder, right? It's not like you had some secrets up your sleeve. But that being said, so in 2021, you've been raising funding, and you've mentioned that you've been part of Techstars. What was your experience there? And why did you come there? And what were your outcomes? And what do you think was the biggest sort of takeaway from that experience?
So I joined Techstars because I wanted to become part of the Atlanta ecosystem, right? So at this point, I had a company with customers, but we were a completely unknown entity, right? So I ended up talking to the head of Techstars here in Atlanta. His name is David Payne. And he was like, Anders, how come didn't know about you? Because I know everybody in Atlanta. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, dude. Like, I've been building a product. Like, I don't network very well. And, I'm busy. And he ended up convincing me that Techstars would be a good idea for us. And I actually had offers to go to several Techstars programs at that time based on early traction. And I ended up choosing in Atlanta because we're an Atlanta-based company. We want to build our roots in Atlanta. And even though, as it turns out, Atlanta is not really B2B focused from a Techstars perspective, I ended up choosing to come to Atlanta. And I did it for a couple of reasons. Techstars for a couple of reasons. Like, I wanted to surround myself with other founders that were trying to solve cool problems and getting help along the way. I wanted to network within the ecosystem. I wasn't really thinking about fundraising at that moment. A lot of companies go to Techstars to get to fundraise. I didn't use Techstars to fundraise at all. In my circumstance for Techstars, I have to say it was a lot of work to basically present on the stage, the Techstars stage upon graduation. I was the only B2B SaaS company in the cohort, so a lot of companies were there, like B2C. A lot of 3 companies focused around servicing Airbnb type activity. So it weren't, from a cohort perspective, it probably wasn't a slam dunk fit for us. But all in all, I would say, really cool companies, really cool people, and I got a lot out of it, but probably not as you would expect, right? And I saw some folks that expected Techstars to do the work for them, and that's not going to be the case at all, right? You're a founder, you're responsible for your own company, and you have to make sure that it happens for you. Regardless, like, no one's going to come with it. No one's going to just say, okay, I'll do this for you, right? You have to do it yourself.
So what were the biggest resources that you were offered, and which of them were the most useful for yourself? Oh, was it only the networking for the most part, or was there anything else?
Well, networking was a big part of it, but also understanding metrics, making incremental changes. Don't wait for perfection, which I've been doing quite a bit of, waiting for perfection. So just get out there, get started, scale. The thing that I wished I listened to more was always be fundraising, right? Always make sure that your balance sheet can facilitate growth. So good ideas from people who have been there and done that. And I think you pick that up by osmosis of being around people. And Atlanta has a very rich startup ecosystem.
Got it.
And it was really cool to be there, actually.
Okay. So you've mentioned that sometime in the middle of 2021, you've decided to stop working with an agency in Ukraine and pivot to really hire your own CTO and your own team. So could you perhaps elaborate a bit on the motivation behind that decision, and how did you get to the point where you were actually able to find a good CTO?
Yeah, those are very interesting questions, right? So understanding that we needed to get SOC 2 certified, which means we have to control the development lifecycle. We have to be able to do pen testing, version testing. There's a lot of rigor that goes into that. And it's very hard for me, or anyone for that matter, to manage a set of folks that don't work for you. Managing releases and those kinds of things, unless, of course, you hire a tier 1 consulting firm that has SOC 2 certification on their own. But we were not in financial position to do that, obviously, right? So what I ended up doing was figuring out who was going to be my CTO. That was kind of like my first thing, because I don't know how to build a dev shop, so I needed to find somebody who could. And I ended up talking to a lot of folks in and around Atlanta that basically said, yes, I'm interested in building a startup. But, before we sort of walk down the aisle together, you sort of have to have the discussion, like, we're pretty much self-funded. Our revenue cannot support a large salary, if any salary at all. So understand what you get into, right? And I have two candidates who both said I want to do this, but they basically got cold feet when I said, look, you can't have a day job and do this at the same time. Like you have to be in. It has to be equity based, and then when we hit our targets, we can pay ourselves, right? I wasn't paying myself still, and it was very frustrating for me because they both walked away. It's like, sorry, I can't do this, too risky, right? Which I appreciate. I just wish they told me that to begin with. But the whole idea was, once we got into it, they walked away, and I decided to sort of change my thinking a little bit to say, look, I want to find somebody who is not onshore based. So I decided to start looking for somebody who was co-located with the development team I already had, which was in Ukraine. And I found my co-founder, my later on co-founder, Max. And I said, look, here's the situation. You get some equity, right? You have a dev shop already that sooner or later, either you will take those people out and hire your own, and we will pay them out of the money that I have raised. But until we hit a certain number, like we can't pay ourselves, right? And Max said, absolutely. And it's funny, right? As soon as I hired Max to come on, it was kind of like the lights came on, because now he was there. He had visibility about releases and testing and all that kind of stuff. And he said, look, here are some things you can do incrementally to make it better, and get better visibility, better results, and so on. So that was great. And very, very quickly thereafter, he started putting in his own guys, and we could sort of get off of the agency and have our own folks. We were a seed round last year, and all of a sudden, number one, we could pay ourselves, and in at least incrementally, take some money out of the company to pay ourselves, but also put in, a bigger, more robust development team, better processes, better systems.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. So it was it sounds like it was a very smooth process, but a couple of questions related to that. So first of all, you've mentioned that you were able to find a CTO that would be able to get paid at the same time you are based on certain metrics. So what is the framework of logic that you've applied to, I guess, make that a streamlined process? Because sometimes this is, I think, where a lot of startups fail, where there is not enough system or clarity between the managers of the company or founders about when do we get rewarded. So what was that framework for you, and how did you sort of find that agreement with your CTO, with Max?
No, it was basically, look, I will not get paid unless you get paid, right? I will pay myself last.
Okay.
That was really it, right? So for me, like I didn't need to get paid. Like my deal with my wife was, when I can pay the mortgage, then I will. But other than that, like, she was going to pay for everything else, right? So
wow, okay.
We got to a point where we said, when we have either reached this revenue line or this funding line, then we can start paying ourselves, right? And it was very smooth. Like we like you said, we raised a bunch of money, and then all of a sudden we can pay ourselves.
And did you expect Max to sort of only work on FocalPoint, or was it okay for him to have some side gigs to support himself?
No, I mean, it was okay for him to have side gigs and support himself, right? Because it was I'm not kidding myself, right? Number one, he lives 7 time zones away. I couldn't possibly know if he did or didn't, but as long as the work got done, then I was okay with that. And I think very quickly he transitioned to everything here, right? So the deal I said is, look, as soon as I start paying you, this needs to be your only job.
Of course.
All right.
Got it. And what was the framework of thinking you've applied to actually determine what is the share you wanna give to your early stage employees? I'm assuming it's not just CTO. You probably gave shares to other folks at your at your company.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to a lot of people that have been there and done that. But what I will say is, from an equity perspective, as it comes to my employees, I'm probably more generous than most, right? I want everybody to be successful. When I hear certain companies who sell for billions of dollars and their early stage employees get nothing, to me it's not how I want to operate anyway, right? I'm sure it's fine, but it's not an environment that I want to be in. So at the end of the day, everybody who works for the company today are our shareholders, right? Which is kind of cool.
It is, yeah.
But really what it comes down to is at the beginning, I talked to other founders And then sooner after that, I started subscribing to Carta. And Carta will tell you, right? So based on metrics out there, here's what startup salary should be and what equity should be, investing periods and everything else. So I kind of look at Carta as a guidepost, and then I give them a little bit more.
That's interesting. Okay. So what does your team look like at the moment? So you've mentioned that you're solo at the moment in the United States, and you have a lot of folks that are overseas helping you out. What does that team look like at the moment?
Right. So once we raised our seed round, we really started kicking into high gear. So a couple of things happened right after, like as we were raising our seed round, the war broke out in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we were very, very fortunate that my CTO was able to leave and bring his family with him and come to the United States. So, we supported him through the journey through Europe, and then waiting for his application for his visa that we sponsored, and then we brought him here. So he's now in Atlanta with us. We have a sales team, like I said, we have BDR, 3 BDRs and 2 salespeople here in Atlanta, and then we have 2 onboarding people and 2 marketing people, including myself. So we have a team of 10 onshore and about 20 offshore developers / testers and so on. So total complement of about 30 to 35 people on any given day.
Okay. And so now back to your personal mindset. I'm curious to hear, I've recently started to listen to this book. It's called Buy Back Your Time, but by Dan Martell. And he's offering some interesting mindset about how you're supposed to take stuff off of your plate as a founder, since you're probably juggling a lot of balls, and really delegate some of it to people in your team. So I'm curious to hear, how are you handling all of that pressure of having to sell to these very complicated companies to still keep building that product and not trying to introduce too much feature creep and so many other things? How do you delegate and how do you manage your time?
Poorly across the board, I'd say. Right? I mean, I work a lot, and the cool thing is it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy all of it, right? With the exception of maybe some more mundane stuff. But I hire people that know what the hell they're doing, right? Meaning my onboarding person used to work for me in the past in large global companies. She knows procurement inside out and backward. I don't have to worry about that. She's got it. It's great. The salespeople I hired have all worked in procurement sales before. They know what they're doing. And product features and functionalities we come up with jointly to say, all right, here's our roadmap. Here's what we need to develop, and sometimes it's develop for this customer or this prospect. Sometimes it's develop for this partner. But at the end of the day, like, we do things fairly jointly, and we do that for a lot of reasons, right? Number one, everyone knows what the hell is going on. Everybody knows what the future product set's going to look like today and 3 months or around 6 months from now. So that's conscious, right? What I find myself doing is I find myself letting out the line a little bit and then pulling back. Letting out the line a little bit and pulling back. So until I see something running smoothly, I tend to be a control enthusiast in that kind of space, right? Because at the end of the day, like, it is my baby, and I am kind of emotionally attached to it, but I have to allow people to do their job without being it really just all up in their business, right? Because I'm hiring these people to do their jobs. I'm paying them good money. They all have equity, right? So we all have a vested interest in being successful. So that is kind of the dynamic I'm working with, right? I'm not saying I'm there yet, and it might take some time, but at the end of the day, I have to let people do their jobs.
Of course. If you were to, I understand this is a pretty tough question to answer accurately, so it's really a ballpark thing. If you were to build a pie chart of what are the percentages of your day that you spend to certain activities, for example, I don't know, 10% to sales, 50% to dev, whatever. What are those components of your pie chart of how you invest your time?
I mean, product, quite a bit of product, quite a bit on sales and reaching out. We spent a lot of time on customer governance, right? So we want to make sure that we stay close to our customers, to make sure that we know what's going on with them, to make sure they're happy, and that also that we mine information from them in terms of what feature functionality they want. So number one, to meet their demands. Number two, to be stickier. Number three, maybe to come up with a new product. I spend a lot of time now in marketing to make sure that we're messaging correctly, making sure that we're speaking the language we're supposed to do. Managing the team is very important, but also managing investors, right? So those are kind of the components I deal with the most. Luckily, like we've never had an outage. Luckily, we've never had, a big fire drill. Luckily, our customers are largely self-sufficient, so we don't have to have a big services team to manage incoming, right? So we've been lucky so far. I think that might come to change as we continue to scale. Like right now, we're in the process of signing a customer who will have 40,000 users on the system. Wow. Now, I expect we probably will get some incoming from that, So, so I think ultimately, once you get to that point, it'll become more important and things will change. But I think I kind of set my time up in chunks, and what I found is that you manage your calendar by color coding things, right? So I have a color for sales, a color for a customer, a color for personal, a color for investors. Like, and you kind of manage that, right? So sometimes my board is completely based on investors. Sometimes it's all about sales, and it just really depends on what their priorities are at any point in time because it changes so quickly.
You've mentioned that some of your time goes towards managing investors. What does that mean? And I know this may sound as a silly question, but it sounds interesting.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they have given me a lot of money, and we want to make sure that they understand what's going on, how we're spending their money, what results we're getting from it, but also to make sure that as I need help, these guys have a lot of contacts, they have a lot of vested interest in our success to make sure, hey guys, I need help with this. Who do you know? What can you guys do for me? Capital is an interesting thing, right? It's more than just capital. Like these people are part of the management team. They're sitting on the cap table. They have, some of them have major shareholder status, meaning like they need to say yes to me for me to do something. So managing that relationship is very important. I think when you have someone on your cap table, like you have to treat them as part of the team.
I'm curious to learn from you. I'm assuming at the time where you were raising, you had some options, right? I'm curious to hear what is the framework or your mind to pick investor, to identify if they're the right fit for you? What are the characteristics that you're looking for in order to make sure that the person you're sort of going down the aisle towards, like you said earlier, is the right person? Or is it more like whatever you get, just be happy and commit to whatever they're going to tell you to do?
So I can only tell you what I was going through, right? So for me, the idea was to be realistic, right? So you have some founders, certainly when I started, that would raise $10 million on an idea with a valuation of $150 million. To me, that was stupid, right? Because at the end of the day, like if the valuation of having an idea is $150 million, like how are you going to scale into that to raise you next round? So right. I didn't so much care about valuation, which sounds strange, right? Like, because I care more about finding the right person, right? Is this a person that I can call up and say, hey, I need some help, or hey, I need some more capital, or making sure that if you've seen the series Silicon Valley, right, you want to make sure that you get the person that's going to help you and not hurt you at the end of the day, right? So it's about building that trust. Like I don't have a board yet, but I'm treating them as such to some extent, right? Certain investors anyway. So for me, like once I found the right investor, like this is the investor I want to use. The funny part is I got one term sheet, all of a sudden like 3 or 4 more came in, right? And some with higher valuations, some with lower valuations, some with a little crazy, right? Because at the end of the day, like people are lemmings; they don't want to lose out. And I ended up, like once I'd picked somebody, I didn't negotiate with that person. Again, weird coming from a procurement guy. I'm like, no, this is the term sheet. This is the investor. These are the terms they set. I'm perfectly happy with this. Let's move on.
I see. It reminds me of the conversation I've had a couple of weeks with Alex Reindels from Vandelux, because I've asked him the same questions about investors, and he gave me some interesting numbers. I wanted to sort of see where does that sort of tie into your picture. How many investors, how many different companies did you have to reach out to in order to get your first investor? How tough was that process for you?
My very first investor was excruciating because, I'd never done it before, right? So I probably reached out to over 100 VCs before I got, the first, like, this is interesting. And it was a very interesting experience. And I love these guys, by the way, but they beat the heck out of me for half an hour. They were like, your ACVs are too low. We think that, this is not going to work. And I'm sitting there, like, it was late at night at this point. And I tell them the story all the time, right? Especially as they refer me to other investors or other companies that they want to onboard. And then after half an hour, after I feel like I've gotten that tar pounded out of me, he's like, this is great. Can we talk again next week? And I'm like, well, okay. And then, I took another beating for the next week. And they were like, well, we're thinking $500,000 at this valuation on the safe note with this amount of discount. Okay. And from the first discussion to cash in the bank, it was like 5 weeks.
Wow. That's fast.
It was straight down the middle as a Y Combinator safe, nothing fancy, nothing crazy, right? So the paperwork itself was really fast. They're great investors. I talk to them very, very often still. And they followed on with every investment that has come in since. So they're great guys. It's just the experience was kind of weird. Like after getting the door slammed in your face 99 times, then go from first discussion to check in 5 weeks, kind of like a surreal experience.
Consider that to be like a learning experience. You kind of had to learn how to talk to them in order to get them to be impressed. And also, it's like they wouldn't be asking you all those questions if they weren't interested. So it's kind of like,
yep.
It's the opposite. You would be like, well, guys, I'm talking to you about this cool idea, and you shouldn't be asking questions because it's all amazing. You should understand it, but otherwise, they just wouldn't commit if they wouldn't. Anyways, I just think that it's a very funny experience because you got to learn first, to land somebody reasonable. And it's so I hear a lot. So these numbers that you've mentioned, they are very common. People are saying that at least 90 to 100 investors you need to talk to get at least one. And then as you get the first one, you get the lead, everything else tends to be much simpler because people, like you said, they have the FOMO quite a lot of times.
Yep.
What is your vision for FocalPoint? Where do you see the company in 5 to 10 years? Where are you guys moving?
I don't have a crystal ball, right? But at the end of the day, we are leading with product. So we, as you can see, 2/3 of my company is all in product development. And I think that will continue to be the case for some time because this is such a target-rich environment for us. So we're developing new features and functionalities all the time, and we're building modules and so on. So basically, my goal is to build something that provides a tremendous amount of value for large companies to manage their suppliers, their risk, and their stakeholders better. And right now, we're in the process of developing at least 3 different modules that will help them do that. So I see us spending probably the next year or so building the first and second versions of those tools, deploying them, and then continuing to improve upon those things. 5 to 10 years from now, heaven only knows. It's a target-rich environment, like I said. So I can see ourselves growing to, if we hit our numbers next year, raise another proper Series A round, scale and grow the team, make it global, more global in terms of how we sell, how we approach the market, and just continue to grow and scale from there. We're having a lot of fun doing it, especially because it's so well received by our customers.
Your story reminds me a bit about the story of my parents. And I'll explain what I mean by this. My mother was 41 when I was born, so pretty late in the time when usually people have kids. And everybody would be, actually, sometimes people would be saying that, when she would be walking with me somewhere in the yard or whatever, people would be saying, oh, wow, Stefan, your grandmother looks so beautiful. I was like, no, this is my mother. What are you talking about? So sounds weird why I'm saying this, but the reason I'm so happy about the way I got my parents was because they would know everything. So they would, whenever I had any problems, they would steer me in the right directions. And they would always have the right advice for me. And I wouldn't be here. I'm from Ukraine myself, as I've mentioned to you earlier. And I wouldn't be here in the United States. I wouldn't be doing my PhD. I wouldn't be talking to you if not for their advice and their wisdom and for all of the investment they've made into me. And I really don't think that people understand how valuable that is sometimes. And I see a lot of commonalities. Of course, I'm not saying you're old, by the way, But I'm saying that a lot of commonalities in your story is because of your experience, because of how mature you are. And it's not just about the value to the investors. It's not just the value to your clients. It's the value to your employees, because your mindset that you've just exposed to me, it's a very mature, a very kind and very thoughtful approach that you don't see very often. You don't see very often people saying that you care about people being from your own industry. You don't care about, you don't really see very often when people say that I'm willing to give them more equity just because everybody needs to enjoy this story and have lots of fun. You don't see founders who are helping their CTOs get out of the country with war. People do the opposite. They just fire them and look for other founders or other CTOs. And so it's just a very, again, like I'm saying, it's that mindset that makes you very unique and your story very interesting, because a lot of times people think, and I'm myself included, by the way, I'm 27 at the moment and I'm having this FOMO that, look, I still don't have that $1 billion idea in my head, even though I'm searching. And I was thinking maybe after I do PhD, after I graduate, maybe I'll need to look for a job, go to some company, because I don't have a startup to work on. But your story makes me think that it's the opposite. It's that you do have to invest into your career, learn from the bright minds, from the elephants of the industry, whatever, in order to later create the innovation that actually helps people, because you have that background. And that's just beautiful to listen to and to see. I'm curious so that was sort of like a side point, but I just wanted to share that. But what do you think about the value of LLMs and really AI to your industry? Are you guys planning to adopt any of that stuff into your product? And if yes, what do you think that would play as an impact to your clients?
So I think there are many things that you can do using AI and machine learning to automate mundane tasks. Do I believe that procurement will be run by ChatGPT one day? No, I don't think so, right? I think
it's too complicated.
It's probably not a good idea. But there are things. So, for example, you have a supplier here that their stock symbol is X. Can you find me the 10 top competitors, the strengths and weaknesses, where they're based, and so on and so forth? Yeah, you can use AI to do that all day long, and I think that's fantastic. And those are the types of things that we're planning on and are in the process of implementing ourselves, to say, look, just push the button and you get the answer, right? And I think that's the stuff that you can do. But I think ultimately procurement in complex organizations are so dependent on people looking at stuff and say, all right, here's the right decision to make, because it's more of an art than a science, because you're dealing with people, right? At the end of the day, procurement doesn't own the stuff they're buying. Someone else is, right? So if you're buying marketing services, marketing cares deeply about what's going on there. They don't care what the cost is, let's be honest. They care about getting this whiz-bang thing that's going to help them sell the next thing, right? And that's okay. That's their job. And so the whole idea is, since you're dealing with people on the risk management side, on legal and the client side and all the other stuff, like, having a robot telling you, here's your supplier, and I go you for it, that's the worst nightmare of our customers, right? So I think we still need a lot of automation. I think that's where AI and ML can come in, and I think that's where things are going at the moment. And I think that is how I see it happening. Now there are people that disagree with me, right? This is everything's going to be done by computer now. I was like, okay, I mean, I've heard that before, right?
People always say that, but it's the devil is in the details. So,
yep, yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
A lot of the things you've mentioned today, they seem very obvious when you talk about them. I'm curious to hear, how do you learn all of that? Of course, again, 25 years in the industry kind of help, but what is your learning strategy at the moment? Do you read any books? Do you have any founders or entrepreneurs, or really anybody who you look up to?
I spend a lot of time talking to people, right? So I talk to other founders, I talk to investors, I talk to chief procurement officers, right? Because at the end of the day, like, I don't consider myself a startup CEO. Like, I'm a procurement guy that happens to sell software. Mm-hmm. And I think, having my finger on the pulse about what's going on in all these different buckets is a great idea, right? So what I'm finding myself learning the most about right now is really just building and scaling an infrastructure. So the whole idea of being able to get a new server set up on demand if your usage spikes, right? That to me is really cool. I'm learning a lot about that. And Max, my CTO, is teaching me a lot about that. While I don't understand most of it, I understand the concepts of right? To say, all right, if all of a sudden, activity spikes in Asia, like we can set up an endpoint there and just funnel the traffic and off we go.
Yeah.
Like, dude, that's really cool. But also it helps me sell to large enterprises who demand that kind of stuff, right? In terms of books, like I find myself reading the same stuff over and over again. Cotter, back to my MBA days where we talk about managing change and those kinds of things. And also I learned about founder-led sales, which is kind of cool as well.
Okay.
So I'm sort of a bit in every camp, I would say.
Okay. All right. I see. Look, this has been a very insightful conversation. I'm very motivated, but by everything you've mentioned, to be honest, still sounds very unrealistic how smooth that journey has been to you. And it's really meant as a compliment, not anything opposite to it. And I think, again, like I mentioned to you before, what you've described, it sounds like it's motivating for a lot of reasons, for me selfishly, but mostly because you used all of that experience, all that baggage of stuff that you've learned over the years to build something that really matters. And perhaps that's why the launch has been so smooth, because you knew exactly what you need to build. You didn't really experiment much. And it's really motivating. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm not going to take more of your time because I know that you're probably very busy and we're on the hour. But I really appreciate your time and your insights. And I really hope we could connect maybe in a year, maybe in two, whenever you'll have a moment, and compare that delta between now and when you serve your company to your some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies in the world, in the United States.
I appreciate the being on the show, Stefan, and always keep in touch. I enjoy that a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.